Let's bring in Trita Parsi. He's the Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. He joins us live from Reston in Virginia in the United States. Trita, always good to have you with us. So despite Israel assassinating Iran's top military and intelligence leaders, Iran continues to respond with missiles and drones, some of which, as we've seen with our breaking news story here, some of them are getting through Israel's air defense. What do you make of these latest Iranian strikes, Trita?
Well, what appears to have happened is that the Iranians have degraded the Israeli air defense systems, and as a result, with a fewer number of missiles, they're actually getting more missiles through. There's plenty of videos on social media that shows a large number of these missiles getting through, and the insufficiency of many of these different air defense systems. And that goes from everything from the David Sling, the Iron Dome, the Arrows, even the American THAAD system. I think by and large, the Israelis clearly miscalculated. They thought that this is going to be easy. They thought that this is going to be the same as bombing refugees in tents, which they have been doing for a year and a half now. Instead, they're getting a real fight back. And the question is, to what extent does that change the Israeli government's calculations? The only thing we have seen so far is that they've gone to the United States and asked the United States to enter the war. But we've not seen any other indications of them trying to find an exit.
So talk to us then about the geopolitical nuances then, Trita, the sort of various scenarios as to how this conflict could end. I mean, the US and Iran could return to negotiations, or we could see a complete destruction of Iran's nuclear program, which is what Prime Minister Netanyahu wants.
Well, the Israelis don't seem to have the capacity of doing the complete destruction. That's part of the reason why they're asking the Americans to step in. But the Americans or the Trump administration does not seem to have much of an appetite for war. In fact, his base, the core of his base, the MAGA base, is dead set against any war with Iran. They're even against the U.S. supporting Israel in this war. And I think there's a strong sense of betrayal amongst many of the MAGA supporters for Trump having gone along this far with the Israelis. So I don't think the U.S. entering the war absent the Iranians directly targeting the U.S. is a likelihood.
Trita, what about the issue of regime change in Iran? I mean, Netanyahu has declared this as one of his objectives. I mean, how possible is this, or are Israel's attacks just hardening the resolve of ordinary Iranians on the streets who would coalesce and come together in support of the regime?
This is, at the end of the day, a very unpopular regime, and the population has very good reasons to find their own government very unpopular. But what we have seen in the last 48 hours is a remarkable rally around the flag phenomenon, not a rally around the government phenomenon, but much more of a rally around the flag phenomenon. And I think that is to a large extent because the Israelis have been targeting civilian neighborhoods, killing people in apartments in their sleep at night, clearly showing very little disregard for civilian deaths. In fact, Israeli media was reporting that they had set off 5 car bombs in Tehran today. That is the definition of terrorism. So when they're conducting themselves like this, they will push away even Iranians, which is a large number, that would very much like to see their government fall. But not like this, not by this type of a terror campaign conducted by a foreign country.
So what about Iran's nuclear program then, Trita? I mean, given the confusing messages coming out of Washington, how is Iran likely then to deal with domestic enrichment going forward? Could we see an acceleration, perhaps, of Iran's nuclear program?
Well, the first thing that is happening is that the program is going to go dark because as the facilities are being bombed, the Iranians are not going to continue to do that type of transparency and inspections with the IAEA, particularly after European countries never even condemned the attack on nuclear facilities. They haven't condemned anything Israel has done to begin with, but even when the Israelis are bombing nuclear facilities, which is a clear war crime, and they made a big fuss of that when the Russians were doing it in Ukraine, they said nothing about it. So under those circumstances, I'm not seeing the Iranians going back to any strong collaboration with IAEA, which means that the international community loses eyes and ears into what's happening in the program. But the other phenomenon that is happening is that this attack and the way the Iranians have suffered, I mean, we're talking about 300-400 civilians' deaths, has really dramatically increased the support for weaponization amongst the Iranian public and amongst the Iranian elite. In the past, there was no such support at all. It was very, very marginal. The support was for enrichment, for having the technology, not for building a bomb. Now the entire country's attitude has hardened. That actually makes it more difficult for the government to then negotiate and agree to a compromise with the United States, because now there's a much higher political cost for them to do so.
Trita, what are you making then of this extraordinary report that President Trump vetoed this Israeli plan to assassinate Iran's supreme leader? If it's true, Trita, why do you think Trump said no?
Well, based on the conversations I had with the Trump administration officials, it is true. And one of the factors here is that in order for there to be any negotiation down the road, there is a realization that one of the key blocks that prevents the Iranians from building a nuclear weapon is actually Ayatollah Khamenei himself, because of his fatwa. You hear other Iranian officials plead with him on Iranian TV to lift the fatwa. So the fatwa is actually eliminated with the death of the supreme leader. So that is one of the factors as to why the Trump administration probably did not want the Israelis to go that far. But also, when you're going after the top political leadership, then you are clearly signaling that this is a regime change war. The Israelis are even calling it a regime change war. Many of the supporters of Israel in Congress are calling it a regime change war. That is exactly the type of language that triggers Trump's MAGA base, because they're dead set against anything that looks like the Iraq invasion of 2003.
Trita, just a final thought to you with the G7 summit in Canada. Do you think world leaders are likely to make any significant response to this current crisis, these ongoing strikes between Israel and Iran? I mean, many leaders have condemned Israeli actions, especially in places like Gaza, and now these attacks on Iran.
Well, I mean, the condemnations against what Israel has done in Gaza is more or less non-existent. And even when it comes to what's happening here in Iran, we're not seeing strong condemnations of the Iranian response. And so bottom line is, if the G7 leaders want to see de-escalation, one thing that for certain will not bring about de-escalation is zero pressure from G7 leaders on Israel to end the war that Israel itself started. If they want to see a de-escalation, there has to be some pressure on Israel, and it has to come from Western states. Otherwise, there will be none.
All right, Trita Parsi there, live for some Reston in Virginia. Trita, always good to have you with us.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.